Hey there, I'm Joe, and I'm coming to you from Nankin Hobby to talk about the invisible specs on a battery. If you've watched the video on amperage and C rating, you may have heard me mention that C rating can sometimes point toward other specs that don't strictly have to do with discharge. A battery with a high C rating is generally going to be a better quality battery overall than one with a lower rating. The C rating itself determines how much amperage can be drawn from the pack at any moment, and as long as it's high enough for your application, you're good to go. If you went higher though, you may still see some gains. One spec that isn't listed anywhere on a battery's label, but definitely impacts performance, is something called internal resistance. Resistance measures how much something will resist the flow of current. When it's low, current passes through more easily, and when it's high, the opposite is true. There's resistance within every electronic component on your RC car, plane, heli, or whatever. There's resistance in the wiring, too. It's common for guys who are racing to have bullet connectors coming straight from their ESC and plugging directly into their battery. They're trying to eliminate extra connectors and thus minimize resistance. Resistance is going to cause a drop in voltage under load, and the bigger that load is, or the higher the resistance is, the bigger that voltage drop is going to be. When you're on a track, for example, and having just a hair more power at a given moment can shave a fraction of a second off your lap time, that could mean winning a race. This can also be a big deal in cases where there's a big load or amp draw on a battery. In drag racing, for example, there's a big amp draw on takeoff. The voltage drop caused by resistance here can be significant. Within a battery, there's resistance in your cells, and there's resistance where the cells are wired or soldered together. This is the internal resistance of the pack, and it's something you'd ideally like to minimize. The problem is that batteries are basically never going to tell you what this spec is. Resistance is rated in ohms or milliohms, and some very high-end chargers will actually give you a readout of the internal resistance of your pack or the cells in your pack. The problem is, even if you spend top dollar for a charger that does this, you're never going to be able to check the packs before you buy them, and you want to know what this spec is before you make the purchase. This is where C rating comes in. Generally speaking, batteries with a higher C rating are better in quality in terms of cells and construction, and they're likely to have a lower internal resistance. Moreover, there isn't a standard for how a battery manufacturer determines C rating. If C rating is about how much amperage can be safely drawn from a pack at a time, then the best test would be to try to draw as much as you can from the pack until it fails. But obviously that isn't tenable, as it ruins the pack. Clearly, there needs to be some information that can act as a proxy for C rating. We know that internal resistance causes a voltage drop when you draw current from a pack, and that pack can be damaged if it drops too low. So internal resistance seems like a pretty good contender for this proxy spec. I've heard that some battery manufacturers do use this to determine C rating, but it's not information that's actually shared by these manufacturers, and other manufacturers might do something else. This correlation makes sense though, and seems to hold true. On average, packs with higher C ratings tend to have lower internal resistance. This isn't always true, but it's probably the best metric you have to go on prior to purchasing a battery. It's also the case that packs with larger capacities tend to have lower internal resistances. So if it won't negatively affect you to run a larger pack, that's a good option too. So, the takeaways. Internal resistance will cause a voltage drop when you use your pack. Lower internal resistance is better, and a high C rating or a higher capacity will generally correlate with a lower internal resistance. Now you're armed with some info, and hopefully you won't be able to resist stopping in to shop for some batteries. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we can't wait to see you again.